Good evening, and welcome to the third edition of Vanguard, Conversations with Women of Color in STEM. I'm your host, Jedidah Isler. I work in astrophysics. I study blazar, supermassive black holes that live at the centers of massive galaxies. And really, this whole series is orchestrated to get you to become an astrophysicist. So if you wanted to know the secret, there it is. In all seriousness, no, I'm very excited to bring to you this incredible panel of women of color in STEM tonight. They are some of the most brilliant women that I know in their respective fields and are making impacts in ways that we'll hopefully get into during this conversation. As you know, our theme for tonight is transition. So we're going to be talking all about transitions, how they affect us, how we have been affected by them, and what's going on in their lives right now. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our panelists. Before I do that, though, let me just remind you this is a live show, and we are looking forward to hearing from you. So please do tweet us your questions at, you can either tweet at Vanguard STEM, at Jedidah Isler PhD, you know, at MoFU for Monica, and at Liz Wayne. Is it right? At Liz Wayne for Liz. So we definitely want you to participate. Use the hashtag Vanguard STEM to participate with us. Hopefully we'll have those questions from you coming in the second half of the show. The way that we'll do it is I'll spend the first sort of 15 to 20 minutes asking the panelists questions, getting their thoughts, and then we'll let you take over with any questions you have about transitions, and if you're going through some, and if they can give you some advice or things that they've learned from their journey. So that's the format of the show. So let's introduce our panelists. First is Dr. Monica Feliu-Mojer. She grew up in rural Hey, Monica! She grew up in rural Puerto Rico, surrounded by nature and with a cow in her backyard, which sparked her interest in all things biology. A scientist turned communicator, she loves building connections to make science and scientists accessible to all. Monica earned her BS in human biology at the University of Puerto Rico in Bayamón, and her PhD in neurobiology at Harvard University. We'll talk about the weather transition too, I suppose. She currently works with CienciaPR and iBiology, two organizations using technology to engage scientists with education, outreach, and communication. Monica has received numerous awards and recognitions, including a Graduate Research Fellowship from the National Science Foundation and the Copus Paul Shin Memorial Award for her efforts to increase public understanding of science among Hispanic audiences. Her work has been featured on international media outlets such as Univision, Voxy, and Scientific American, among others. Thank you so much for joining us, Monica.
It's a pleasure.
Also is the esteemed Dr. Cyntrica Eaton. Hey, Cyntrica.
Hi.
She is an alumna of Norfolk State University. Behold, got good taste there, girl. And she's been a faculty member in computer science there since 2008. She received her PhD in computer science from the University of Maryland, College Park, and her primary research foci are web development testing and cybersecurity. An emerging interest is in understanding how to integrate entrepreneurial training in the computer science curricula at Norfolk State and ultimately beyond. Thanks so much for coming on, Cyntrica. We're looking forward to hearing about that intersection.
So honored to be here.
Last but not least is the soon-to-be Dr. Liz Wayne, who may or may not, right, thanks for coming, Liz.
Yes. Yes.
She may or may not have the most intense transition coming up as she's defending her dissertation on September 30th. So let's all send positive vibes her way as she becomes doctor at the end of the month. Liz is a Mississippi native and, as we said, soon to be PhD in Biomedical Engineering. She attended the University of Pennsylvania, where she got her bachelor's in physics. She uses nanoengineering to develop immune-based cancer therapies. She cares deeply about representation of women in physics, and she organized a conference for undergraduate women in physics in Cornell in 2013, and has been recognized on a university level for her commitment to improving the campus climate for women. She also co-hosts a podcast called PH Divas. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I am so excited to talk about all of your lives. I cannot wait. And so I think, actually, I am going to start with you, Liz, because as you say, you're in the middle of a pretty significant transition. So tell us a little bit about what the dissertation is, what that means in the process of what you're doing, how that jives with your graduate experience, and how the process of obtaining your PhD has maybe changed as you're getting closer to the dissertation phase, where you are now and how you're sort of working through these final steps.
Okay. I'm very happy to answer these questions. Mostly because I know exactly how to answer, because it's all I think about all day, every day. Hashtag all day, hashtag every day. So the dissertation is a summation of your research experience in your department. So usually in a PhD program, you may spend the first 2 years doing coursework, and then after that you have a research proposal, which is somewhere in the middle, and then you defend at the end. And that's actually what I'm doing right now. I am culminating and writing a huge document explaining all the research that I've done and what I know about the field. So it's also a summary of what I am contributing to the field, which means I have to know what's already in the field to begin with, and I have to put that all in one document. The cynical part of me is I need to convince people that I know what I'm talking about and that they can let me go and free into the world and do them great service. So there's twofold part to this. I write every day, and then I procrastinate about writing every day. and then when I'm actually legit not writing as much as I should, I go do something fun so that I can actually get back to seriously but hardcore writing every day. And the transition part of it is extremely difficult because I'm trying to do more than one thing at once. Mm-hmm. A dissertation is a lot of work, and that's great if that's all you're doing. I'm also trying to get a job. And I'm also trying to figure out where I'm going to live. And I am also, so everything is kind of converging right now. And I'm trying to make this work so that when one ends, the other picks up. It's like this nice little curve. That's not really happening, but it is happening. It's not happening on my time.
Right.
If I can say that. So it's a bit of, I'm comforted because I see you awesome ladies, and I know that it's doable and people do this. Internally, though, it's just this tornado, and you're always trying to remind yourself you're in the right place at the right time, and just to keep looking for opportunities because you don't know when they're going to come. But it's so hard because half of you want to be in the books, in the lab, and the other half of you needs to actually be out talking to people and doing things like this.
Right. Right. So, I mean, it's good that you point out that you don't really have very much on your schedule. It's good to know that it's very calm and there's nothing really going on. But no, you are mentioning something that is a really big part of transitions, and that's the unknown, right? Like, you just don't know what's going to happen, and you don't know when. And I think that's why it's really important for us to have these conversations about transitions, and to your point, really important to have them in public and in an open forum, because it is true, like, three of the women that are on the call with you have all gone through this process, and it's going to look different and feel different for each one of us, but it is true that there's some encouragement by knowing that people have gone through this and it's going to be okay. I wonder then if we could pivot over. You're gonna be okay.
The struggle is so real.
The struggle is real. It is. So I wonder if maybe we could pivot to really first some advice for Liz. If Cyntrica or Monica, do you have any advice as she's talking about trying to handle the different facets of her life? Anything that helped you as you were going through the process?
Cyntrica, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think for me, when I was making the transition, it was a little bit different because I actually left Norfolk State knowing that I wanted to come back here and teach. However, at some point, I was trying to figure out if that was the right path for me, right? So it seems like when you get to this portion of your life, it's almost like, okay, am I really making the right decisions? And you never really know, right? You just have to jump into it and make it, and if it doesn't work out, you figure out the next path, right? So I think you have to kind of, at this point, just trust your instinct. You've gotten to this point. You're going to go on. I would say trust your instinct. For me, I was trying to figure out where I want to go, and people were telling me you should do this and you should do the other, and I had to make decisions for myself, and I really had to just trust my own instinct.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's about following your passion. I didn't go into academia when I finished my PhD, and although that is not the norm, I mean, not most people are not going into academia, particularly in biomedical sciences, that it's still the expectation. And so for me, I think there's going to be a thunder coming. So pardon me if there's a loud noise. There's a thunderstorm outside. I can see the lightning, so I just know it's coming. So one thing that was important for me, since I was doing something that most people didn't expect me to do, or most people didn't think I should do, because if you don't go down an academic path, what's wrong with you? That's what you're training for. So I think something that was very important for me was knowing where my passion was and where my passion is. I knew by the point I finished my PhD, I knew that I was very passionate about education, that I am very passionate about outreach, about communication. I'm very passionate about leveraging all of those things to make science more accessible, particularly to underrepresented communities. And so that was my guiding light in making that transition. In many ways, I had to create my own path, but because I was guided by that passion, I was sure that that's what I wanted to do. It made it easier to ride the rough patches. Also, having a community. Having a community was so important, because there were many times that I was like, I don't know, am I doing the right thing? And having a community of mentors, having a community of strong women to support me, even, not to give me advice, but just to listen to me and hear me out and say, it's going to be okay, we're going to be right here. That was really, really important. That community also helped me find and identify opportunities that otherwise I couldn't have.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Actually, I wanted to come back to this notion of the norm versus the expectation, right? That often what makes transition so difficult is not just the fact that it's something new and it's sort of at the frontier of your experience by definition, but that there's also this tension. There can be a tension between what is expected of you and what you want to do. And so I really like that both of you pointed out this, following your gut and following your passion, which are along the same stream. That transitions are innately difficult because they require you to differentiate yourself in the way that is different from where you might have been the time before. Mm-hmm. So as you're going through this process, Liz, know that, again, you will make it. You will still. I remember when the minute after I finished my dissertation, you come out in the hall and everybody's like cheering for you, and everybody was like celebrating, and I had to literally go and stand in the corner and just I stood and stared at the wall for like 10 minutes because it was just such a moment. But then you realize that, you're still breathing. Life still is going on. You can still continue. There is a day after September 30th. So it's a really helpful thing. And I also go ahead.
In addition to this transition conversation and following your gut, it's not only looking at what people want you to do, but you're doing it in mass with other people, and everyone's on different timelines. And I mention that because sometimes your friends or your colleagues may get a position really early and they know something before they even defend or graduate. And then there are some people that take up to a year to find a job. And there's a wide spectrum, and I think that as you're going through the transition, because you don't know what your outcome is going to be or when it's going to come, that in itself is something where you really have to trust your instincts and believe in yourself and believe in your path, because, you're happy for your friends, but you also see them getting opportunities, and it's so easy to go, where am I? How am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? Or I'm not competitive. So maybe I thought I was great. I mean, I definitely went through this thing where I thought I thought I'd be somewhere different than I am now, but I don't have these offers. I didn't get those responses to the emails that I sent out. And so what does that mean about me as a person or my academic merit? So those things are definitely also a part of it. It's like there's nerves and there's everything. Yeah.
Yeah. There are, and it is true, right? Like, this is the differentiation, right? That, we all aren't going to go down the same path. One of the sort of anecdotes that I heard that I thought was actually pretty funny, or sad or whatever. It has its own sense of emotions, but how, you know, academia can in some ways be looked at as an alternative career at this point, because it is not the like main trajectory of most people, whether they want to be on it or not. And I think the power in that statement, other than sort of the, you know, the irony, is that it allows for some freedom, right? Like, I think as we give more opportunity for people to follow different paths, it opens up opportunity. Cyntrica, you mentioned something I wanted to go back to when you said that, you know, you left Norfolk State and knew you wanted to come back and teach, but then you had that moment where you were like, wait, is this what I want to do? Let's dig into that moment a little bit and talk about that.
You know, I really think that moment was inspired by the voices that were around me, because actually, you know, growing up, nobody else in my family had a PhD, right? So I didn't know why you got one. You know, I thought maybe you got one to get more money or something like that. And so actually, I was at a summer program at MIT, and I was told absolutely not. Like, you don't want to do that, because you are going to be in graduate school and your friends are going to be, you know, working and making big bucks. And, you know, so if it's just for the money, that's not the reason to do it. So I knew that Norfolk State poured a lot into me. I wanted to come back and pour a lot into other people. But, you know, when you're at an institution like University of Maryland, and, you know, everyone's going different places and to really big labs, and so you kind of think to yourself, well, should I do that? Maybe I would be more of an asset if I do that first and then come back. So it's always this aspect of, you know, trying to figure out your path in a chorus of voices, including your own, right? So knowing your own purpose, having an idea about where you want to go, hearing other people, it's tough to navigate, but that's why I said you have to kind of go back to your own instincts, right? So in my case, I knew what I wanted to do. I think this was my purpose, and so, you know, I think it kind of all worked out for me. But yeah, the chorus of voices, I think, are going to be something that you have to kind of tease through. In some case, you'll have a good chorus, you know, somebody will be in there with a good voice and give you a little something. But in a lot of cases, they'll detract you, and you don't really know. I think they have the best intentions, but you have to figure out for yourself what you want to do. And it's so tough because you don't know if you're making the right choice, and so you're super cautious and careful. But in the end, I think it all kind of works out.
It does. It does. And you know, this idea that we could mess up, we could make a mistake, and that is sometimes a very crippling part of the experience, right? What if I make this decision and it's not the right decision? And I think, you know, as you go through more and more transitions, what you find out is that sometimes you do make the wrong decision, right? Like, it is not as if we all like think really deeply and all of a sudden the right decision is made, right? Like, there are some times when we do make the wrong decision, and that's still okay. Right? In the same way that when you win, you know, the day keeps going, you proceed, you keep breathing. When something bad happens, you do the same, right? You hopefully, you know, recover and find some space and find some time. You know, there's so much potential in a transition for the good and the bad, and I think it's okay to acknowledge that A, we've all been through some bad transitions, and B, that we made it through and that we can. Monica, you mentioned about having that support system, and that's something that recurs in these conversations, how important it is to have people to talk to have people to, you know, strategize with. And sometimes it's just to have people to go and hang out, as you say, Liz, and go, you know, do something fun. You know, that's just how it is. So I wonder if you could talk about how or if your support systems change during specific moments of transition. You know, did you start to collect different people around you at those moments? Did those people continue along with you? Let's talk a little bit about that. Monica, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think there were some constants. There were people that, you know, I think about the different transitions I've had in my career, and particularly the transition from finishing the PhD and going into being, you know, an outreach scientist. There were people that were constant. They had been there since early on through the PhD, and there were people that knew me really, really well. And so they were able to provide advice. they were able to provide advice in terms of the big picture of the long term because they knew me so well. But as I began thinking, well, I want to go into outreach, I want to go into doing science communication, then I began seeking people and building a network of people that could provide advice in terms of, well, how do you find a job? What kind of opportunities are out there? You know, what are the spaces? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? So I definitely had people, and you know, this community, there were people that were advisors, there were people that were mentors, there were people that were sponsors. So it was a community, a diverse community in terms of the kinds of people that were part of it. I would say that, and I don't know if there was recently an article, I don't remember where it was, that about the shine theory, that basically if you surround yourself with excellent people, they're going to make you shine brighter. And so I think looking back, that was a part of what I did. I surrounded myself with people that were excellent professionally, that were excellent friends, that were excellent mentors, and I think that they provided that essential support for me to make that transition. Obviously, my family was super important. My husband was incredibly important because I wasn't sure if I was going to find a job in outreach, because is outreach a career? You know, that was a question that I definitely faced when I finished up. So there were different kinds of people, but that community was a constant. And in my particular case, having also a community, so in my case, the Puerto Rican, the Latino community was very inspirational. So it wasn't people that directly were providing me mentorship or support, but there were people that were really inspiring to me, because a lot of the work that I'm doing is driven by the idea of giving back, of helping out Hispanic communities, Latino communities, underrepresented communities. So that was very, very important, because they provided critical motivation and inspiration while making that transition.
Yeah, I think a lot about this notion of, I really like that idea of, you know, as you figured out and honed more of what you wanted to do, you started to bring people into that network that could help serve that goal. Cyntrica, did you feel like, since you knew you wanted to come back to Norfolk State, that you made strategic alliances before you left, or maintained them while you were in graduate school?
A little, and I was naive about the process. So I was under the impression that, you know, I called somebody on the phone and they set aside an office for me, and then I was back home. But apparently, you know, I had to go through the process. I had to give a talk, and, you know, I had to do all these other things and sit across from people who, you know, were maybe my dean when I was here, but now, you know, were in the vice president's office, right? So it was this really kind of interesting, you know, situation. But I did make sure that I kept ties back, and I made sure that everybody knew what I was doing, and I'm almost finished, and, you know, I'm done, and I'm gonna, you know, actually stay for another. I stayed at Maryland another semester after I finished, largely because I finished in December, and so, you know, it's kind of just natural to go back in, you know, August as opposed to in January. So just making sure everybody knew what I was doing, but also, you know, keeping or making alliances, or making, you know, adding to my network new people who were at Norfolk State who I didn't know.
Right.
Because that's another thing. So it's one thing to have, you know, your former biology teacher, you know, tell you what's going on. It's something else for a person that's brand new to say, this is what I'm seeing. Right. You know, and so those people I'm really, really good friends with even today. And so I think it's a little mixture of both. You know, I knew this is where I wanted to come. So I made sure I kept in contact with people who I knew when I was here, but also the new people.
Very nice. Liz, do you have anything you wanted to throw in there?
Actually, I did. So, since I'm still actually, I guess, in school right now, what I was just thinking about was, I think a little bit over a year ago, I, for the first time, actually considered, what do I want to do? What am I what am I good at, and what am I uniquely good at, and then what do I want what's my passion, and then for the first time try to consider, is it actually academia? And I actually at that point realized that my academic sphere knew nothing about industry, and I had to start networking and trying to make that transition because I needed to understand what academia or what industry actually was, because it's a completely different language, and the way you talk to people is different, and how you package yourself, and what's actually how do you say what's important to them, and those type of conversations. So I actually had to start reaching out to people and putting myself in spaces where I was definitely uncomfortable, but this was my effort to, I knew I was going to have to graduate eventually, and I'm sort of a planner, or I like talking and feeling things out, and so I thought it'd be safer to do it as a student, and I think that's a really good tip when you're transitioning, that the transition doesn't just have to happen once you actually get kicked out the door, so to speak. So I started, I guess you can say I threw a rope overhead, and I started feeling out the environment. Do I enjoy this? Is this what I want to do? Oh, it turns out I don't have what I need. Maybe I can take this little course here or do something here to help me look more competitive in certain spheres. So that was something that I had to do, and I think that's also useful to think about whenever you make a transition. Just start talking to people and figure out if you like it, and then figure out if the skill sets you have match those, and if they don't, is it just a matter of repackaging it, or should you actually add something to that? I would say that my friend circles in terms of support have been more or less the same. My friends, like my personal friends, are the same, but the professional friends I've made have definitely changed based on when I needed them. I use my professional network when I'm feeling especially low. That's actually when I'd have the most meetings ever with people, because I need someone. I say, hey, I'm doing this, this is happening, I don't feel very well. From your perspective, what does this sound like? Or from multiple perspectives to help me when I don't feel like I'm being very centered. So that could be faculty. And when I was looking at industry, it was people who have well-established jobs in those locations. It was other graduate students, some who've already graduated or who like a little bit ahead of me. And I found that very interesting in terms of support group. Yeah.
Great. And actually, no, that was perfect. All three of you have already given really incredible advice. You talked about preparation for transitions, and let me just say it explicitly because I think it's a theme that ran through all three of your comments, is that, you know, the transition was preceded by a number of different behavioral changes, right? You started to bring in people, you talked to people, you know, and that all was overlaid on the foundational sort of personal networks that you have of the people that sort of march with you through different steps. So since we talked about preparing for a transition, that implies that, you know, there, as you say, some thoughts have been, you know, shared on a transition. And so I want to talk a little bit about the timing of these transitions. Some of them are more, you know, set in stone, like September 30th dates, for example, right? Like those dates are set in stone. It turns out that you want to make those dates. But things like Monica going from finishing the PhD and going into SciComm or going into, you know, outreach or engagement, those things don't necessarily have a date, right? But there is some preparation that you're doing. So let's talk a little bit about the timing on a transition. How did you know it was time for you to make that transition, and how did you know where you were in the process? Let's talk about the timing and how that timing relates to the preparation that you took.
Oh, I knew that I wanted to make that transition way before I graduated. I knew I would say halfway through my PhD that I wanted to pursue something in science communication in outreach. And so I think I started preparing before I knew I was preparing for it. I think in my case, I was already volunteering for Ciencia Puerto Rico, one of the organizations that I work with. And so I was already very involved in outreach, very involved in science communication. But I think once I realized this is what gets me out of bed every morning, this is what I want to do, I want to leverage my training, my scientific training to do this, I think at that point I started preparing myself. I started looking beyond, the expectation of seek a postdoc, look for pursue an academic career. So I started taking workshops, and I started taking, mini courses and things to kind of improve my communication skills. I started doing, at that point when I was at Harvard, they started doing programs for the PhDs in biomedical sciences to explore entrepreneurship and to explore an MBA. So I started kind of expanding the things that I was interested in, looking to improve some of the skills that I thought would prepare me better to pursue a career as a communicator, as an outreach scientist. So I did a lot of communication training, a lot of communication workshops. In terms of right as I was getting ready to graduate, I didn't have a plan and timing in terms of timing. I knew that, so at that point I was graduating, I was going to stay in the lab for a little bit, finish up a few things, and then I was going to move to Seattle, actually. And I didn't know anybody in Seattle. I didn't know nothing about what the outreach communication scene was there. So I started preparing, although I didn't quite know where I would land, I was pretty certain of the kind of job I wanted. So I just started networking with people. I didn't know anybody in Seattle, but I told everybody in my network and their mother to hook me up with somebody in Seattle. I want to go to Seattle and do science communication and outreach. Who do you know? And so I started preparing myself, setting up meetings with people, getting coffee, volunteering, visiting programs and stuff in preparation to get to know kind of the landscape. Although I didn't know where I was going to land, it took me like 3 months to actually find a job after I moved to Seattle, and that was great because it was the first break in like 9 years I took. So it ended up working out. But yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of preparing myself. I think it was also a process for myself, knowing, do I know the right people? Do I have the right tools? I think that was what really made it an easier transition, given the amount of uncertainty that was involved. Mm-hmm. I think the best way to put it is I couldn't necessarily control the job market. I couldn't control necessarily what kind of position I was going to get, but I could control what I could do to make myself more competitive and more visible. And so that's what I focused on when I was kind of undergoing that transition.
I'm just wondering if you would have done anything differently. If there's anything you can think of that you might have done differently.
In terms of what?
So you have this path, you're 3 months, in, and then it's a point where you could panic, right? But I get the impression that you weren't panicky, or maybe you were, right? But I'm just wondering if there's something you can think of that might have been different. But and I guess I'm thinking about my own experience. For instance, when I left Norfolk State, I only applied to one graduate school, MIT, and I did not get in. Mm-hmm. Right? And so it ended up happening the way it was supposed to. University of Maryland accepted me, as did Virginia Tech, and I was able to make that choice. But if I could go back and do anything differently, I probably would make sure that I had more of a safety net, right? So I'm not saying that you needed a safety net, but I'm just wondering, in hindsight, if there's something you might have done a little different.
I don't know. I mean, there's nothing that jumps out at me that I would have been like, I mean, there are things that I would have done differently, definitely during my PhD, in terms of some of the skills that I feel that I'm maybe not lacking, but maybe not so good at, that would have been helpful to the transition. Those were things that I wasn't thinking about while I was doing my PhD. For example, one example I can give you is is in terms of being a more strategic thinker. That's something that now that I'm more in a managerial position, I'm like, well, I should be better at that. And I think back to the PhD, and I'm like, well, I could have learned how to do that better while I was a graduate student. I could have been a better strategic thinker with my dissertation project, and I wasn't. And so in that sense, yeah, but particularly during a transition, I can't think of anything that I would have done differently. But I would have, yeah.
And I think that's a fair answer. Yeah, I think that's a fair answer, right? It's by definition in a sort of indefinite space. Actually, I wanted to get into this notion that transitions are active practices, right? They're active processes. They're things that you have to do. Talking about sort of cliches that fit the moment, the one that I'm thinking is, dress for where you want to go. And it sounds like all of you have done that to some extent, right? You started talking to people. You went in and took classes. Actually, that was really interesting to hear that both Monica and Liz, you all took classes and things that seemed like they were going in the direction you wanted to go. And so I think, there's something about helping to determine the track that you're on by doing things that approximate it, right? So if you want to be a science communicator, it might be good to know about how to communicate well, right? If you want to work in industry as a cancer researcher, it might be good to know the language that cancer researchers use to advertise themselves, right? That there is an active way that even though we can't control the job market or control, the hiring process, but we can make ourselves more like what we're trying to get to. Right, and that sense of activeness, and Cyntrica, you mentioned something about it, and it really resonated with me because there is the fear. Liz, you talked about it very viscerally, and that's just the way it goes. Sometimes we freak out, sometimes we don't, and there are all kinds of emotions that go with it. But if we can find that thread of hope, really, that what we're going to do may potentially work out, then that can continue to push us along the line. And if we take the transition as an active process, if we go and do things, then we actually end up influencing what the outcome is, even though we don't have control over it. And it's interesting to me that all three of you have sort of mentioned these elements, and so I think it's really important to point them out, right? That you can dress for the place that you're trying to go. Even if you can't control what the hiring decision is, you can control how much you look like what you're trying to obtain. Cyntrica, you stole my question.
I'm thinking about who I think might be watching and how important it might be to hear that maybe there was something I could have done differently. So I just thought her question, I thought it was a great response, and maybe that would help other people. So that's why. Sorry.
Oh no, you were perfect, and what you did was absolutely right. I just was like, well, I'm just gonna cross that one off.
Okay. Transitions aren't smooth, so transitions. I mean, I always think in terms of a line or a graph. It's just you're going up and down, and I just want to also add that I'm dressing for the job that I want, but I'm also just trying on the clothes, right? Like it's not.
That's a good one.
So part of it isn't just that I'm like, I was born to do this. I don't know that. Some days I feel like it, sometimes I don't. And so when I first started this transition process, it was not just to say, I know I want this job 100%, let me see it. It was, I don't know if I want this job, so let me see if I really like it. Oh, never mind, those clothes don't fit. I don't like that color on me. This is the wrong, like that cut doesn't work for me. Let me try pants instead of a skirt. It's just going in that different direction. And so I think with transition, always to remember, it's never just some straight line. It's always going back and forth, and it's moving. And you don't actually just have to know what you want. You have to just, it's the looking, not the actual finding, that is the transition. And then quite often, you don't know when you're, transition is such a weird process that you don't know you're out of it until you're actually out of it. Like you literally have that next thing. But from the day you question, what if, until the day you get the job, it's just it's a very fluid process, and it's a lot of changes, and I think that's why it's scary, because it's uncertain. It's like for 6 months to a year, you wake up and there are knots in your stomach every now and then. That's what transition is, and if you can deal with the uncertainty and kind of say, okay, I know my stomach is trying to knot, let me smooth it out and let me keep moving. If you can keep doing that, then that's like half the process.
Absolutely. I totally tweeted your,
Yeah.
dress for the job, but I'm also trying on clothes. That was amazing.
Yeah.
So let me just say explicitly for those those of us who are watching that if you have questions for our panelists, now is the time to start shooting them at me so that I can see them and ask our panelists themselves. So please do shoot those questions along. And I wanted to talk about sort of something you said, Liz, there, how transitions are ongoing, right? We have localized on specific ones in each of your lives, but that's only one of, a million transitions that you've gone through in your life. And so the first question I think I'd like to throw out to all of you is, what are some other transitions that you had, whether or not they are academic or not, that have been, signal posts in your life? And the second part of that question is, do you feel like you've gotten better at going through transitions over time based on the body of sort of transitions that you've been through?
I'll start. I'm going through a little bit of a transition now, health-wise. I have been trying to run for years, but I've kind of committed to actually getting good at it. And so, part of it is I want to, fit into certain dresses. Part of it is I want just a healthier lifestyle for myself. And so what I've been doing is trying to work out every day. And that has been a transition for me. As to whether or not transitions get easier, I think they do. Just because as you continue to make the transition, you notice that if you failed before, you kind of pick yourself up, right? So you have that practice of failing, and you can move forward.
I agree. Once you sort of hit the floor, you realize, oh, okay, yeah, there's the floor. That's good to know.
Right.
A little bit, but I can get up. Yeah.
Right.
For me, I don't know, Monica, if you already knew which one you wanted to say. Does she know? Okay. So
go for it.
I feel like I'm so used to transition, and I think that one of the reasons why I'm okay with making transitions is because I'm really okay with being uncomfortable. I know that sounds really weird, but
no.
As long as I can make up in my mind that the discomfort I'm feeling is because I'm trying to make a change in my life and not because something in me personally is wrong, I don't know, in my mind I can justify that and find the strength to keep going. And I never do transitions alone. I talk a lot, so I find it, I kind of flip it on its head and I use it as a form of empowerment. So there's no, like, I am strong because I'm actually trying to figure out what I want in my life, right? Like, would I rather sit there and not be happy with what I'm doing or where I am, who I'm with, whatever it is, or am I willing to actually step out there and say, I don't know what I want, but something has to be better. Let me try on some different things and let me see how that works. And I think that that's worked well for me, and it's a survival mechanism. I've sort of incorporated that into how I go through life, and I think doing it more often has made it it never feels easier. Every transition, it hurts, I think. There's this level of anxiety, but doing it more has made me feel, again, like this is the situation. This is not me. This is the situation. And once I find the right fit, it's going to work out well. Because at the end of the day, it's about the fit. So just because something didn't work out doesn't mean that I was bad or the thing was bad. It's just that they wanted something and I wanted something else. And you have to keep working constantly to find that fit. Because when the right fit comes, it's also really worth it. So that's kind of generic, but I think being okay with the discomfort, using it as a strength, and kind of letting that mantra push me through whatever else it is that I have to go through.
Yes, I love that. There was recently, I bought this necklace. There's this artist, it's a Puerto Rican artist she makes wearable wisdom. That's the best way to put it. And I got a necklace that says that great things never come from comfort zones. And so That fits perfectly what you just said, Liz. I think you do get more comfortable with transitions as you grow, as you mature as a professional, and as a person. I mean, they're always going to be hard. Change is hard, but I too have come to embrace that hard part of change, the hard part of transitions, because of what I discover about myself. I think, recently I've transitioned into more leadership positions, and that has been a hard transition for me. It has been a hard transition because there are leadership skills that I have to learn, or I've had to work on to become better. But also mentally, it's been really hard because sometimes I find myself thinking, am I a leader? Do I have what it takes to lead an organization, to lead a bunch of people? And so it's kind of an inner transition and an inner struggle. But I've been actively, we talked about how transitions they're an active process. So I've actively been thinking about and working on, well, how can I be better at this? How can I embrace this transition from being kind of standing in the back to actually leading, to being comfortable with leading? So, I think through this process, it's what's helped me, and I'm still in the middle of it. It's being active. It's recognizing what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, and actively working on them.
Yeah, I wouldn't want somebody to try to say, oh, I fell into this position, I fell into this. No, I am trying out what I want to be. I am actively deciding my fate, or I'm actively playing a part in where I'm going to be the next day. I don't know where it's going to be, but I know it's going to be better than what it would have been if I hadn't tried.
Right, exactly. And something that you both, all three of you actually, pointed to was, lost it.
Oh, you can rewind.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, really? Okay.
Was the how we've talked about transitions as, something that we go through as even an active process, but now y'all are bringing it full circle to the fact that the transition actually changes us too, right? So when we get to the other side, we actually look a lot different than we did when we started, and it's because of the things we pick up. It's because we realize, oh, I'm not gonna, I don't have to, suffer a large-scale failure because this happened, or, these are the things I'm learning along the way. So I really like how we've gotten full circle that, first we start with a little bit of fear and trepidation about the fact that the transition is coming. And then we start to prepare for that transition and say, okay, here are the things that I can do. Here are the ways that I can augment my skill sets, augment my networks to really help me get to where I'm going. And, it might not be that I know exactly where I'm going. I'm going to try on a few things. And in that process, we are inevitably getting better. We're inevitably doing better than we were when we first started. So it's a really important point you say there. So I did have to bring up a question. We got a question for Gestronomy. Hey, Nicole. She wants to know about the transition to SciComm jobs. So she says, post-doc applications are just around the corner. When do you start applying for SciComm jobs?
Well, it's trickier because I feel like being a science communicator is kind of an emerging career. It's, you're definitely not going to find pages and pages worth of SciComm jobs like you find, pages and pages of postdoc jobs, ads on, online or whatever. So I think instead of thinking about when do you start applying for SciComm jobs, is once you decide that that is something that you want to do, or at least something that you want to try, start talking to people. My experience has been that, there's not a lot of jobs out there that are SciComm jobs, that are purely science communication jobs. You may be able to find science writing jobs, but in general, they're not as easy to find, as common to find So what I would say is start talking to people. The question should be, when do you start reaching out to people? When do you start networking to get that kind of job, to get connected into the community, to maybe connect to an institution, a department, an organization that is, that is looking for somebody who has science communication skills, who can do outreach for that particular organization or department. Unfortunately, it's something that it's not as easy to find yet. I'm hopeful that it'll change as the scientific community realizes how important science communication is for science to thrive. But I think right now the question is, when do you start reaching out? When do you start building those skills, those connections that are going to make you competitive? And my answer to that would be, as soon as you realize that that's what you want to do, or that's something that you at least are interested in. I mean, and I think becoming a better communicator and developing effective communication skills, the effective communication skills that are going to make you a good science communicator, are going to help you no matter what career you pursue. But if you really want to go into science communication, then start reaching out to people, start talking to them about their process, about what they know, who they know, what's open, what's happening in the community, because it's not, it's not mainstream yet, so it's not as easy to find a job as a postdoc.
Right, good point. And I also want to underline the fact that we live in an era where, even though there's not a specific job description, there may not be, a repository of jobs in SciComm right now. Being very active on social media is a really good way to find out how people do it, right? This is one of the best forms of science communication that exists right now. And if you follow and watch and emulate people who are doing this kind of work, they can really give you tips and tricks on how to be better at it. And furthermore, they can tell you, some of the connections that they've made, introduce you to the circles. One of the main things that we are initially plugged into in our field as graduate students is our professional societies. Well, it turns out that those professional societies exist for pretty much everything under the sun. And so you start to plug into things like the AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science. You start to plug into these, there are many of them, I can't say them all, but you plug into those and they will put you in contact with people. So this is, like you say, Monica, this is about driving the people that you know and driving towards the conversations you want to have. There's a follow-up question from Hey Dr. Wilson, Hey Caleb. How do you get active in SciComm as a graduate student?
I'll quickly say some things. One, there was a science communication, I know Monica can probably answer this better. There's a science communication class that I took, and so I got connected with the professors in the science communication department, was one thing. I actively started interacting with the cancer survivors community that was in my area, and started making forums that scientists could actually talk to them. And honestly, through starting that network, so letting people know I was interested in that and having them hear me speak, later led to other opportunities where I was being invited to be on panels and just be acknowledged for awards and being on a better platform to do those kind of things. So it's not, I guess what I would say is, you can find those things, but also just talking to people and letting them know that you're aware of it, because, so that then when they find opportunities, they can directly ping you on some things.
Yeah, good point. And one of the things that I actually didn't know this happened until I got sort of further along in graduate school, but often what will happen is people who do these things actively and who have become somewhat known for doing them get asked a lot because there's no repository, because there's no place to go. When people see a person that does it really well, they're like, oh, can you come? And then before you know it, you're doing everything. And so one of the things that people do is, when they have to say no, which invariably they will, they'll say, sorry, I really can't do this one, but if you talk to this one, and they'll give names, suggestions of people to talk in their place. And so if people know that you're interested in it, then they might say, oh, well, yeah, I can't do it, but Nicole could, and here's her information, right? So it puts you into this conversation. The network, I mean, we've talked about a number of different topics in these first 3 episodes of Vanguard, and the network is by far one of the most important pieces of any kind of success. Whether people acknowledge it or not, having a network, it can make or break a career. That's just one of the fundamental principles. Cyntrica, I know that you're starting to work towards doing some outreach and engagement, and as you say, making computer science more visible and interactive to students. So could you talk a little bit about how you're navigating that transition while also sort of being a faculty member?
Well, so what I'm trying to do and what I'm interested in is, my thinking is that computer science is one of those majors where you can learn the skill and apply it and make money for yourself today, right? So in some cases, we teach our students languages that they may not use until they work at an IBM, or they may not use until they work at a Google. But if they know how to make apps, then they can make businesses for themselves today. And so I think we teach them the coding part, we teach them the computer science part, we don't teach them necessarily the business part. So what I'm exploring now is how to do that. What is the best way to present to a computer science student the entrepreneurial aspect of what they're doing, in addition to the technical aspect of what they're doing? And I'm really at the brink of it, right? So this is a transition, absolutely, because there are avenues that I'm not aware of. Do you hear feedback? I'm sorry.
You. Could I get?
I'm not sure what's happening. Hello. Okay, so yeah, basically, I'm at that point where I'm talking to business people, and I'm talking to business professors, and I'm linking with people who have thought about that transition, thought about linking computer science and business, students together to kind of share and cross-pollinate these ideas that can be beneficial to them now and once they leave here. And so I really am in the process of answering your question, Jedidah, with my life, right? Like I don't know yet, but I'm working on it.
Well, we will be sure to keep tabs on you to see how that goes.
Fantastic.
That's amazing. We're coming into the last few minutes. Let me just give a shout out. If anyone has any more questions that they want to ask, feel free to do it now. In the meantime, let me just say, you all have been amazing. It's really been my honor and pleasure to have this conversation with you and to hear your words of wisdom. Thinking about the discipline, we didn't get to this specifically, but the discipline, Liz, you talked about writing every day. That's a discipline, right? We talked about the way that transitions are active processes, right? If we take part in the transition, if we embrace it, if we try a lot of things on, then we become changed by that interaction. We talked about going a little bit against what the norm is and what the expectation is and finding our space. Thank you for that, Monica, right? We talked about, how to trust your instincts, Cyntrica. We talked about that and how, when you're going to a new space, the best person that's going to know how that space feels to you is you, right? So being true to that and honoring that. We talked about the fact that there is not just one great transition in life. There are many transitions that we're constantly going. But I think one of the key points that you brought up that's really important is that you actually get better at doing the transition thing. The first time you have to make a major decision, it's daunting and you don't know, and oh my goodness, what if you fail? It turns out sometimes that the failure is the best thing that can happen to you, because then you realize, oh, well, the worst thing that's happened and I'm fine. So, this idea that there's ongoing transition, ongoing things that we're doing and moving and being and seeing in the world. I'm going to come back to your wearable jewelry that you talked about, Monica. Great things never come from comfort zones. So I guess we better get out of this comfort and get into something, something else. So thank you so much for that. Actually, the last question that I have for you is, there was another question. There's a quick question. If y'all could each give me like 30-second answer. The question is, how do we get undergrads, grad students, and postdocs to think beyond education and about the business of STEM? Give me your 30-second answer to that.
I think one word is just exposure, right? So I don't think that when they're in undergrad, that students are trained to do that kind of thinking. They're trained to get the basic concepts. And so allowing that exposure, I think, is going to be the biggest thing.
That's a great answer. It's a great answer, and we're gonna speak more on that in future episodes because I think that's a key thing going forward. So since we're closing up, let me just thank our panelists again. Thank you to Drs. Eaton and Feliu-Mojer, and thank you soon to be Dr. Wayne. We really appreciate you being here. I also need to thank Lana Hunter, who I can get y'all to mute. I'd also like to thank Lana Hunter, who is responsible for making sure things happen behind the scenes. She is my angel, and I could not do this without her. Thanks also to Jasmine Johnson, who designed our logo and all the stuff that you see, the flyers and stuff. And also to Nicole Cabrera, who has been helpful in getting the word out. So thanks, everyone, for participating. Thank you for being on the show, and we'll see you next month, the first Tuesday of October, 7 p.m. Eastern. Vanguard, Conversations with Women of Color in STEM. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.